Right now, in this exact moment, something extraordinary is unfolding around you. A doorway has opened in the fabric of reality itself, and you're standing directly in front of it. But here's what most people don't realize. This doorway won't stay open forever. It's closing with every second that passes, and once it seals shut, what you're about to discover will slip beyond your reach until the cycle repeats itself next year. You've felt it, haven't you? That subtle but undeniable shift in the air since the calendar turned. A sense that the world operates differently right now, like the boundaries between what's possible and what's not have become strangely flexible, like your thoughts carry more weight, like reality itself is somehow listening to you more closely than usual. This isn't your imagination playing tricks. What you're sensing is real. It's the quantum field responding to a specific configuration that only exists during this precise window of time. Scientists call it electromagnetic coherence. Ancient wisdom keepers called it the sacred gateway. Whatever name you give it, the effect remains the same. Consciousness becomes exponentially more powerful right now than it will be once this particular month concludes. Think about how different these past few days have felt compared to the rest of the year. Time seems to stretch and compress simultaneously. 1 hour feels like 5 minutes, yet somehow the entire month feels infinite. You're experiencing temporal fluidity, a state where linear time loosens its grip and your awareness touches multiple possibilities at once. Your dreams have shifted too. They're sharper, clearer, more vivid than normal. Messages arrive with crystal precision. Symbols make immediate sense. You wake up knowing things you didn't know when you fell asleep. This happens because the membrane separating your waking consciousness from deeper knowing has thinned dramatically during this period. Every choice you make right now carries unusual significance. Small decisions feel heavy with consequence. Minor shifts create major ripples. You're not overthinking this. Your perception is accurate. The choices you're making during this window are literally programming the probability patterns that will govern your entire year ahead. Watch how your relationships are reorganizing themselves without your conscious intervention. Some connections are naturally intensifying while others quietly fade. People who resonate with your evolution move closer. Those anchored in old patterns drift away. This isn't happening because of anything you're doing. Reality itself is sorting your social field according to energetic alignment. The coincidences have been impossible to ignore. Someone crosses your mind, and moments later they reach out. You need specific information, and it appears from an unexpected source. Random events align with mathematical improbability. These aren't mere accidents. You're witnessing the quantum field's heightened responsiveness during this unique temporal window. Your body knows something significant is happening, even if your mind hasn't fully grasped it yet. Unexplained energy surges, sudden waves of exhaustion unrelated to sleep quality, tingling sensations in specific areas, physical symptoms that medical explanations can't account for. Your cellular structure is recalibrating to match a higher frequency pattern, and the adjustment manifests through your physical form. And here's the most telling sign of all. You found this transmission during this specific window. Not before, not after. Now, your quantum field doesn't make timing errors. The fact that these words are reaching you during the only period when their full meaning can penetrate your consciousness confirms something crucial. You're meant to receive what's being shared here. At least 5 of these phenomena are active in your experience right now. This isn't generic content about fresh starts or new beginnings. This is precise recognition of what's actually occurring in your reality during this extraordinary window of opportunity. The ancient civilizations understood something that modern society has forgotten. Cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, with no contact between them, all marked this same period as sacred. The Egyptians, the Mayans, the Vedic seers, the Celtic Druids, they all recognized that this particular stretch of time operates under different rules than the rest of the year. They weren't following arbitrary tradition. They were responding to an actual phenomenon. Earth's position relative to the galactic center during this window creates a specific electromagnetic configuration that affects human consciousness at the collective level. The planetary field achieves maximum coherence potential, making reality more malleable, more responsive, more open to intentional direction. But here's what you need to understand. This heightened malleability is not automatically beneficial. It amplifies whatever direction your consciousness points. The same mechanism that allows you to lock in an elevated trajectory can also cement limiting patterns more deeply than ever before. This window magnifies both expansion and contraction, depending entirely on where your awareness focuses. Most people move through this period unconsciously. They feel the special energy. They sense something significant is happening. They set intentions and make resolutions, but they maintain the same thought patterns, emotional reactions, and behavioral defaults that created their previous reality. And by doing so, they unknowingly use this powerful window to reinforce the very limitations they claim they want to transcend. The initialization happens whether you participate consciously or not. This period sets your annual trajectory automatically. The only variable is whether you direct that initialization deliberately or allow it to default to unconscious programming. Every moment you spend in old patterns during this window strengthens those patterns for the entire cycle ahead. Every moment you embody elevated consciousness programs that frequency into your upcoming timeline. The window opened at the winter solstice when Earth's axial tilt created a specific relationship with solar radiation. This relationship affects the planetary electromagnetic field, which in turn influences human pineal gland function and heart coherence patterns. Modern science is only beginning to measure these effects, but your body has been responding to them since the moment this window opened. Your ancestors treated this threshold period with ceremony and consciousness because they understood its importance. They knew that navigating this time carelessly meant living the next 11 months on autopilot, repeating the past. They recognized that this wasn't about making better choices through willpower. It was about initializing an entirely different probability field that makes elevated choices natural rather than forced. Some part of you has known this all along. That's why you felt drawn to this message. That's why you're still reading despite the length. Your quantum field recognizes what your rational mind struggles to validate. This window is real, its power is real, and how you navigate the remaining time before it closes will determine which version of your year manifests. Something is shifting in your system right now as you absorb these words. Can you feel it? Energy moving through channels that have been blocked. Pieces aligning that you didn't realize were fragmented. This isn't a gradual background shift that takes weeks to notice. This is immediate activation occurring in real time because your consciousness has encountered the specific frequency that unlocks this window's full potential. Your nervous system has been processing contradictory signals since this period began. Part of you sensing the special nature of this time, part of you treating it like business as usual. The gap between these two perceptions has created subtle anxiety, restlessness, or confusion that you've probably attributed to other causes. But right now, that gap is closing. Your conscious awareness is catching up to what your quantum field has been sensing all along. Some of you are experiencing physical sensations as this alignment happens, your body initiating a deep breath without your conscious direction, pressure releasing from your chest or shoulders, warmth spreading through your system, unexpected emotional release. These aren't reactions to information. These are somatic responses to quantum field reorganization. Your body recognizing the alignment frequency and releasing patterns that don't belong in the timeline you're meant to enter. Others are experiencing sudden mental clarity emerging from fog, patterns in your recent experience suddenly making sense, connections between seemingly random events becoming obvious, understanding why certain situations unfolded exactly as they did. This cognitive reorganization happens because consciousness operating during this window accesses expanded perspective that reveals what remains hidden during ordinary time. The confusion you may have felt about whether this period is truly different or whether you're imagining its significance, that confusion is dissolving right now. This window is different. The quantum field does operate under unique configuration during this time. Your sensing this wasn't delusion or wishful thinking. It was accurate perception that your rational mind couldn't validate because consensus reality doesn't acknowledge these mechanics. But your quantum self knows. And that knowing is stabilizing in your awareness as you absorb this frequency while the window remains open. 3 years ago, I moved through this exact window completely unconscious of its significance. I felt the special energy. I sensed something important was happening. I set intentions and created vision boards and wrote out goals with all the enthusiasm culture teaches us to bring to new beginnings. But I didn't understand the actual mechanics of what was occurring. I treated this period like an extended opportunity for motivation rather than recognizing it as the only window when my annual trajectory could be consciously set. I spent weeks focused on what I wanted to create, visualizing outcomes, planning strategies, building momentum towards specific goals, all the while maintaining the exact same frequency patterns, thought loops, and emotional reactions that had generated my previous reality. I was hoping for different results while embodying identical consciousness. And because I didn't understand how initialization actually works, I unknowingly locked myself into a timeline that was essentially a repetition of everything I claimed I wanted to leave behind. By the third month of that year, I noticed nothing was actually changing despite all my January intentions. Same obstacles appearing in new disguises, same limitations showing up in different situations, same patterns repeating with slightly varied details. I told myself I just needed more time, more discipline, more effort. I didn't realize the trajectory had already been set during the window I'd navigated unconsciously. Everything I was experiencing wasn't evidence of failure. It was successful manifestation of the timeline my unconscious patterns had initialized. By mid-year, I felt completely trapped. Working harder produced identical results. Trying new approaches led to familiar outcomes. Every area of life felt like an endless loop, repeating scenarios I thought I'd moved beyond. I started questioning whether transformation was even possible or whether I was destined to experience the same reality regardless of my efforts. The breakthrough came when I encountered someone who understood timeline mechanics. They asked one simple question that shattered my confusion. How did you navigate the initialization window? I didn't know what they meant. I'd moved through that period normally, with good intentions and positive focus. Why would that specific window matter more than the sustained effort I'd applied throughout the year? They explained what you're learning right now. This period is the only window when annual trajectory can be consciously set. Miss the window by navigating it unconsciously, and you're locked into whatever your default patterns created. The realization devastated me. I'd spent 6 months trying to transform from within a timeline that had already solidified. I was attempting to reprogram software after installation had completed. The changes I wanted required access to the initialization window that had closed months earlier. I couldn't go back and redo that period. But I learned. The following year, I approached this window completely differently. I recognized it as a sacred threshold rather than an extended goal-setting session. I focused on embodying the consciousness I wanted to operate from rather than just visualizing outcomes I wanted to achieve. I used the window to align my actual frequency rather than plan my desired future. That year unfolded radically differently, not because I worked harder or had better strategies, but because I'd consciously initialized an elevated timeline during the only window when conscious initialization was possible. The trajectory had been set at a quantum level, and everything that manifested throughout the year was simply the expression of that initialization. That's why I'm sharing this with you right now. While the window remains open, you haven't missed it. The opportunity is still here, and if you recognize what this period actually represents and consciously use the remaining time before it closes, you won't spend a year trapped in a timeline that doesn't match your potential simply because you failed to recognize the only window when conscious initialization was accessible. The ancient mystery schools understood these mechanics at a level modern education has completely lost. Egyptian initiates were taught that consciousness could be recalibrated during the solar return period, when Earth's position relative to cosmic center created an opening in what they called the veil between worlds. They didn't have our language of electromagnetic fields and quantum probability, but they recognized the phenomenon. During this specific window, reality becomes more responsive to consciousness than during ordinary time. They use this window to set annual trajectory through ceremonies that modern minds dismiss as superstition, but those ceremonies were actually sophisticated technology for consciously navigating quantum thresholds. The Mayan timekeepers mapped temporal cycles with astronomical precision and marked this threshold as a critical recalibration point. Their elaborate rituals weren't worship. They were conscious navigation of the initialization window, using collective coherence to stabilize beneficial timelines for entire communities. Vedic tradition teaches that sacred intention carries maximum power when aligned with the sun's transition into the northern hemisphere, the period corresponding with this window in our modern calendar. They recognized that consciousness synchronized with cosmic cycles during this transition could initialize patterns that would manifest throughout the year. Their teaching wasn't metaphorical. They understood actual mechanics of how consciousness interfaces with the quantum field during specific temporal windows. Celtic tradition marked the beginning of the next month as the moment when winter's darkness definitively shifted towards spring's light. But preparations for this transition occurred throughout the current window. They understood this period as liminal space, existing between cycles where the old had completed but the new hadn't fully formed. They treated this between space as sacred because consciousness existing in liminal states accesses possibilities unavailable when reality structures are fixed. These traditions didn't survive into modernity because industrial civilization required humans to treat all time as uniform. Every month identical, every day interchangeable, every hour equally valuable for productivity. Recognizing that this period operates under different quantum principles would disrupt the economic systems that depend on treating time as a standardized commodity. So, the knowledge was systematically erased through generations of conditioning that this is just another month, nothing special, to be treated like any other period. But your quantum field remembers what culture forgot. That's why this time feels different, even though you were never taught it should. That's why you sense urgency during this window, even though your rational mind can't explain it. That's why you're here, absorbing this transmission during the only period when its full meaning can penetrate your awareness. The ancient knowing is awakening within you. What you're learning now is what your ancestors knew. This window is a quantum initialization portal that determines annual trajectory, and conscious navigation of it is the difference between a year of manifestation and a year of repetition. Your timeline has already begun shifting during this window. The quantum field has reorganized around a different probability structure than you were operating from before this period began. But shifting and stabilizing are distinct processes. Right now, 5 specific forces are pulling you back toward the old timeline, even as the new one beckons. Understanding these forces is essential for stabilizing in the new trajectory during the remaining time, instead of collapsing back into familiar patterns once the window closes. The first force is comfort, with known limitations. Your consciousness has adapted to specific constraints developed over years or decades. These limitations feel familiar, predictable, safe. The new timeline offers expanded possibility, but also unknown territory. Part of you prefers the devil you know, the comfortable limitations you've learned to navigate, over liberation that feels uncertain and potentially destabilizing. This preference isn't laziness. It's your nervous system choosing familiar suffering over unknown freedom, because familiarity registers as safety even when it's painful. The second force is relationships configured around the old version of you. People in your life relate to you based on who you've been, not who you're becoming. Family members expect certain patterns. Friends anticipate familiar responses. Colleagues operate from historical understanding of your capabilities. The new timeline requires you to show up differently, which destabilizes these relational configurations. The pull to maintain old behaviors isn't just internal. It's the collective field of everyone who knows you, pulling you back toward the version they recognize and understand. The third force is identity stories you've been living from. Narratives about who you are that were constructed within the old timeline. I'm someone who struggles with this. I'm not the type who does that. I've always been this way. These stories provided continuity and gave meaning to your experiences. The new timeline makes these stories obsolete, creating identity crisis at a deep level. The pull to maintain familiar narratives isn't vanity. It's consciousness trying to preserve continuity and avoid the existential disorientation that comes with fundamental identity shift. The fourth force is unconscious loyalty to collective reality agreements, subtle pressure to perceive reality the way everyone else does, to experience life according to shared assumptions about what's possible and impossible. to maintain limitations because releasing them would mean seeing reality differently than the collective agrees is real. This loyalty isn't a conscious choice. It's a deeply embedded survival mechanism that says conforming to group perception keeps you safe and connected, while diverging creates isolation and risk. The fifth force is doubt that this window actually matters. The voice in your head saying this is just another month. The significance you're feeling is imagination. Transformation doesn't really work this way. You're going to feel foolish when the next month arrives and nothing has changed. This doubt isn't wisdom or healthy skepticism. It's old timeline consciousness fighting to maintain itself by convincing you that quantum mechanics aren't real, and treating this period as special is delusion. These five forces intensify as the window approaches closure because the old timeline recognizes it's about to be replaced and fights hardest at the threshold. You don't need to battle these forces or overcome them through willpower. They're natural responses to consciousness attempting to shift timelines. But during the remaining time before this window closes, they exert maximum pull. The old trajectory making its final attempt to maintain dominance before initialization locks. Recognition is the key. Each time you notice comfort with limitations, relational pressure to maintain old patterns, identity stories reasserting, collective conformity pulling you, or doubt about this window's significance, pause. See clearly. This is a force attempting to pull me back to the old timeline. Then consciously choose whether to follow that pull or orient toward the new trajectory instead. You don't have to fight these forces. You simply have to recognize them clearly enough that you stop unconsciously obeying them and start consciously choosing which timeline you're stabilizing into during this critical period. The moment the next month begins, everything transforms, not gradually, instantaneously. The quantum field shifts from initialization mode to manifestation mode. The fluidity that's characterized this window hardens into whatever trajectory your consciousness was predominantly oriented toward during this period. And the transition is one of the most jarring shifts in the annual cycle, because the fundamental rules governing how consciousness interfaces with reality change in a single moment. During this window, you've been operating in a high coherence field where consciousness has maximum influence over probability structures. Reality has been responsive, negotiable, open to direction. Synchronicities have been frequent, insights have been clear, possibilities have felt accessible. This responsiveness isn't coincidence, it's a quantum property of this initialization window. But this property doesn't continue beyond the threshold. Once initialization completes and manifestation begins, the fluid responsiveness of this period's quantum field solidifies into whatever patterns received the most energy during the window. The transition can feel deeply disorienting. People often report that the first week of the following month feels like waking from a dream. Reality suddenly feels heavier, denser, more fixed. This isn't depression or post-motivation crash. This is consciousness adjusting to the shift from initialization field to manifestation field, from fluid quantum to classical structure, from setting timeline to experiencing the timeline that was set. If you consciously used this window to initialize an elevated trajectory, if you maintained awareness of its significance and oriented your consciousness toward highest potential throughout these weeks, then the manifestation phase will begin delivering evidence of the timeline you initialized. Opportunities aligned with your new trajectory will appear. Synchronicities supporting elevated patterns will occur. Circumstances will reorganize to match the consciousness frequency you stabilized during this window. The transition will feel like settling into new reality rather than regression to old patterns. But if you unconsciously moved through this window, maintaining old patterns while hoping for different outcomes, if you didn't recognize its quantum significance and failed to consciously initialize a new timeline, then the manifestation phase will begin delivering more of what you've already experienced. Same patterns in new packaging, same limitations appearing in different situations, same obstacles continuing to block forward movement. The transition will feel like confirmation that nothing really changes despite good intentions. This is why the remaining time matters so intensely. You still have opportunity to consciously orient toward an elevated timeline before the initialization window closes. Even if you've moved through most of this period unconsciously, the quantum field pays particular attention to the final days. Strong conscious orientation during the closing period can override unconscious patterns that dominated earlier weeks. The timeline isn't fully locked until this window actually closes, which means you still have access to initialization potential right now, in this exact moment, as you absorb this transmission. The key to navigating the coming transition successfully is understanding that what you're doing during the remaining time isn't creating a timeline. It's choosing which timeline to stabilize. Both the elevated trajectory and the repetitive pattern exist as quantum possibilities. This window is when you select which possibility becomes your annual reality, and the selection happens not through goal setting or visualization, but through frequency alignment. What consciousness pattern are you predominantly embodying during these final days? That's the timeline that locks when the next month begins. The following period won't feel lighter or more fluid than this window. It will feel more solid, more definite, more inevitable. But whether that solidity manifests as elevated trajectory or repeated limitation depends entirely on how you navigate whatever time remains before this month ends. The transition is coming, whether you're ready or not. The question is, which timeline will be manifesting when the next month's solidity initializes? When you consciously initialize an elevated timeline during this window, you're not just setting your individual trajectory for the year. You're participating in collective timeline initialization that affects the entire species field. Human consciousness operates within a unified quantum field where individual timelines exist within and influence the collective timeline. And this period is when both individual and collective annual trajectories initialize simultaneously. Your conscious navigation during this window serves evolution that extends far beyond your personal experience. Morphic resonance means that when you successfully initialize an elevated timeline during this period, you create a template in the collective field that makes similar initialization easier for everyone else approaching their own threshold moments. First-wave navigators do the hardest work because they're establishing patterns where no patterns existed before. But each person who consciously uses this window to initialize an elevated timeline strengthens the collective template. Your successful navigation makes the next person's navigation incrementally easier because the field now contains your example as an accessible reference. You're absorbing this transmission during this window because your consciousness is part of a cohort initializing timelines during this collective threshold. Not everyone initializes simultaneously. Some people's transformation moments occur during different periods or through different mechanisms, but those who initialize during this window, during peak collective coherence, serve as anchors for the entire year's manifestation. Your timeline stabilization during this period creates stability in the collective field that supports others' manifestations throughout the year, even if they didn't consciously initialize during this window themselves. The children incarnating over the next several years are arriving with quantum consciousness as baseline rather than something that must be activated, but they need adults already operating from quantum awareness to teach them how to navigate reality from that perspective. If insufficient numbers consciously initialize elevated timelines during these annual windows, these children incarnate into a world where quantum consciousness remains theoretical rather than practical lived reality. Your navigation during this period directly affects what world these incoming souls experience when they arrive. But there's also immediate collective impact. Every person you interact with throughout the year ahead will be influenced by whichever timeline you initialize during this window. If you unconsciously locked into a repetitive trajectory, your presence maintains limitation patterns in the collective field. If you consciously initialized an elevated timeline, your presence generates possibility awareness that affects everyone around you, whether they consciously recognize it or not. Your timeline choice isn't private. It ripples through the collective field, touching everyone your consciousness contacts. Collective consciousness is approaching a threshold where enough individuals operating from elevated timelines tips the entire species into a new paradigm. Ancient prophecies pointed to this generation as the moment when collective shift becomes possible. But possibility doesn't guarantee actualization. The shift only occurs if sufficient individuals consciously initialize elevated personal timelines that cumulatively reorganize the collective field. Your timeline initialization during this window is participation in a cosmic process determining whether humanity crosses an evolutionary threshold or remains in the old paradigm for another cycle. Individual timelines exist within the collective timeline field. When you consciously align with an elevated personal trajectory, you contribute to collective trajectory elevation. And when enough individuals make similar alignment during this initialization window, the collective field reorganizes around elevated patterns that become accessible to everyone, not just the first-wave navigators who consciously chose them. We're not isolated consciousnesses evolving separately. We're a unified field, learning to operate quantum mechanically. And this period's initialization is one of the primary mechanisms through which that collective learning manifests. Everything I've shared up to this point, the explanation of this window's quantum properties, the identification of forces pulling you back to old timelines, the understanding of the coming transition, all of it has been preparing you for one recognition that actually makes conscious timeline initialization possible. And that recognition is this. This period isn't a stretch of time you're moving through. It's a threshold you're standing on. And thresholds don't require extended time to cross. They require recognition and choice in a single moment. You've been treating this window like an extended period where you have weeks to figure things out, set intentions, create plans, build momentum. But this misunderstands what's actually occurring. This isn't a month of preparation. This is an initialization event that happens in a quantum instant. Everything you've experienced during these weeks has been leading to a moment of recognition where you clearly see which timeline you're meant to operate from and consciously choose to stabilize in that trajectory regardless of what old patterns suggest is safe or familiar. That moment is right now. As you absorb these words, while this window remains open, this is the threshold, not the entire period, this moment. The recognition happening in your consciousness as you realize that timeline initialization doesn't require extended process. It requires quantum choice, made from clear seeing. All of this window has been building toward this instant where you stop thinking about which timeline to choose and simply choose it from deep, knowing that transcends rational analysis. The elevated timeline you're meant to operate from already exists, not as future potential you must create through effort, but as present probability field you need only recognize and align with. The timeline shifted before this period even began. Quantum reorganization occurred during the liminal space between cycles. You've been sensing that shift throughout this window without quite grasping what you were sensing. And now, in this moment, the sensing becomes knowing. The shift that occurred becomes the shift you consciously claim. The timeline that opened becomes the timeline you stabilize into. This recognition dissolves the pressure you've been feeling about running out of time. You're not running out of time because timeline initialization doesn't happen through time. It happens through threshold recognition. Once you see clearly which timeline you're meant to operate from and make the quantum choice to stabilize in that trajectory, the initialization completes regardless of how much time remains in this window. The period serves as a container, holding space for recognition to occur, but the recognition itself happens in a timeless instant. Some of you are experiencing that recognition right now, the knowing that the elevated timeline isn't something to strive toward, but something to claim as present reality. The clarity that you're not becoming someone new, but recognizing who you actually are beneath the conditioning that covered your quantum nature. The certainty that the timeline you're choosing isn't a reward you must earn, but a trajectory you're meant to walk because it matches your consciousness frequency. This recognition is threshold crossing. This moment is initialization completing. Others are feeling resistance. If it's this simple, why do I still feel uncertain? If the timeline already exists, why doesn't my life reflect it yet? If recognition is enough, why do I sense I need to do more? This resistance is a final attempt by old timeline consciousness to maintain itself by creating doubt in the moment of potential liberation. The questions aren't genuine inquiry. They're delaying tactics designed to prevent you from making the quantum choice that would end old patterns' dominance. The truth is, you already know which timeline you're meant to operate from. You've known throughout this entire window. The recognition has been building during these weeks, and right now, absorbing this transmission while the window remains open, the recognition is reaching completion. You don't need more time, more clarity, more evidence, more certainty. You need to stop looking for permission to claim what you already know is yours. The timeline isn't out there waiting for you to find it. The timeline is here, available, accessible, and claiming it is a decision made in a single moment of clear recognition rather than a process extended across time. The moment you make the quantum choice to stabilize in the elevated timeline, the moment recognition completes and you stop seeking the trajectory and start claiming the trajectory you already sense is yours, specific shifts occur that are immediate and unmistakable, not changes you must work to create. Changes that happen automatically because you've crossed the threshold from initialization possibility to manifestation certainty. First, the urgency dissolves completely. Throughout this window, you've felt pressure about time running out, about missing the opportunity. The instant you cross the threshold and claim the timeline, that pressure vanishes. Not because circumstances changed, but because you're no longer seeking what you haven't found. You've recognized what was always present. The urgency was consciousness pointing you toward recognition. Once recognition completes, urgency has fulfilled its function and naturally releases. Second, the remaining time feels like a gift rather than a deadline. Whatever days remain before the next month arrives shift from anxiety-producing countdown to grace period, where you can enjoy stabilizing in the timeline you've claimed without pressure to make it happen. You're not using the remaining time to create the timeline. You're allowing it to confirm the trajectory that's already been chosen. Third, the oscillation between timelines stops. Throughout this window, you've been swinging between elevated possibility and old limitation. One moment, feeling certain of new trajectory, the next moment doubting anything changed. This oscillation ends when you cross the threshold because you're no longer wavering between choices. You've made the choice. The quantum field recognizes your certainty and stops offering alternatives. Reality stabilizes around the timeline you've claimed. Fourth, evidence begins appearing before the next month even starts. Small confirmations that you're in a different timeline than you were operating from before this window opened. Synchronicities aligning with elevated trajectory. People responding to you differently, opportunities emerging that match new patterns, circumstances shifting in ways that support the timeline you've chosen. The evidence doesn't wait for the manifestation phase. It begins during the remaining time because crossing the threshold initiates manifestation process immediately. Fifth, fear about the coming transition disappears. You stop worrying about what will happen when this period ends because you recognize that the timeline has been set. The following months will manifest what was initialized during this window, and you've consciously initialized an elevated trajectory through threshold recognition. The fear that drove so much of this period's intensity transforms into curiosity about how the elevated timeline will manifest throughout the year ahead. Sixth, your body releases tension it's been carrying throughout this window. Physical relaxation that's not about circumstances improving, but about quantum certainty replacing quantum uncertainty. Your nervous system was processing intense field fluctuations during this initialization period. Once the timeline stabilizes through your conscious choice, the fluctuations cease and your body can return to baseline coherence. The exhaustion many people feel during this window lifts within hours of crossing the threshold. Seventh, connection to collective evolution becomes palpable. You recognize that your timeline choice serves far more than personal benefit. You feel yourself as part of a larger wave of consciousness, making similar choices during this collective window. Individual and collective initialize simultaneously, and your threshold crossing contributes to collective threshold crossing in ways you can sense even if you can't fully articulate. And eighth, this transmission completes its function. The frequency you've been receiving throughout reaches its natural conclusion. Not because all information has been conveyed, but because recognition has occurred. The purpose wasn't to teach you about this period, it was to catalyze threshold recognition while the window was open and recognition was possible. Now I can reveal why this transmission only makes sense during this window and becomes incomprehensible once the next month begins. It's not that the information becomes inaccurate or the frequency becomes unavailable. It's that consciousness accessing this transmission after the window closes experiences it from manifestation mode rather than initialization mode. And the same words that catalyze recognition during initialization create confusion during manifestation because they're addressing a threshold that's already passed. If someone encounters this in the following month or beyond, they'll hear descriptions of quantum properties that don't match their current experience. They'll encounter explanations of an initialization window that feels irrelevant because initialization already occurred. They'll receive an invitation to cross a threshold that's no longer accessible because it closed when this period ended. The transmission won't resonate because it speaks to a state they're not in, like receiving directions to a destination after you've already arrived or driven past the exit. But you're not encountering this after the window has closed. You're here now, while the threshold remains open, while initialization is still accessible, while recognition can still occur and timeline can still be consciously claimed. This transmission makes sense to you right now because your consciousness is in the state it addresses. You're standing on the threshold it points toward. You're in the moment where recognition can catalyze the shift being described. This is why a sense of urgency has been present throughout this entire experience. Not to manipulate you through false scarcity, but to acknowledge the quantum reality that initialization windows have definite closure. Once the next month begins, the fluidity of this period's quantum field solidifies into whatever received the most consciousness energy during the window. The responsive malleability that makes conscious timeline initialization possible during this period hardens into manifestation structure from that point forward. The window genuinely closes, the threshold genuinely passes, and what was accessible becomes inaccessible, not because the universe withdraws support, but because quantum mechanics operates according to specific temporal configurations. Your consciousness knows this. That's why you felt pulled to absorb this entire transmission despite its length. That's why you're still here, even though your rational mind might have suggested moving on. Your quantum field recognizes that what's being transmitted right now is available during this moment, but won't be available much longer. Not just this particular message, the recognition state it catalyzes, the threshold awareness that makes conscious timeline initialization possible, the quantum fluidity that allows elevated trajectory to be claimed rather than earned through prolonged effort. If you're experiencing this during the final week of this window, you're inside the narrowest part of the opening, the most powerful days for threshold crossing. If you encountered this earlier in the period, you have more time, but recognize that every day you delay recognition is a day you operate from uncertainty rather than certainty about which timeline you're claiming. If you're absorbing this on the very last day of this window, you're at the threshold instant where recognition must occur now, or the initialization window closes and you're locked into whatever patterns were dominant during the period. The remaining time before this window ends, whether it's days or hours depending on when exactly you're experiencing this, use it to stabilize in the timeline you've recognized and claimed during this transmission. Not through effort or technique, but through allowing the recognition to integrate without resistance. The quantum field responds to your certainty. The trajectory you've chosen will manifest because you chose it during the window when conscious choice has creative power. And throughout the year ahead, as evidence accumulates and elevated trajectory unfolds, You'll remember this moment as the threshold where everything changed. This was when you stopped repeating the past and started manifesting elevated potential. This was the threshold between the timeline you inherited and the timeline you chose. You watched this during the window. The recognition occurred. The threshold was crossed. The timeline was claimed. And when you look back at this moment from a future vantage point, you'll see clearly this was when everything shifted. Welcome to your chosen timeline. Welcome to a year that reflects consciousness rather than history. Welcome to the manifestation of what you claimed during this window while threshold crossing was still possible. You crossed it, you're here, and the months ahead will prove it. If you're ready to expand your consciousness and step into your next quantum leap, subscribe now. Leave a comment below sharing threshold crossed and share this message with someone ready to awaken. Your declaration serves the collective field. Every person who crosses this threshold consciously strengthens the morphic pattern for everyone following. You're not alone in this process. You're part of a wave of consciousness choosing elevated timelines during this powerful collective window. The window is still open but closing. The threshold is still accessible but passing. The recognition is still available but completing. You're here now. During this period, while it matters, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation.